Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. We are on, I believe, the 19th installment of Project Poirot this week. 19th? 18th, 19th, 20th, somewhere in there. I should know this better by now. And we are on Hercule Poirot's Christmas. Yay! I think this is also known as A Holiday for Murder. Oh God, I think it's got a couple of different names. But anyway, the way it is known in the US is Hercule Poirot's Christmas. So that is what I will be calling it. If you've never seen one of these videos before, do not do spoilers. Now, I should clarify this because I actually saw a comment on this. I consider spoiler-free to be that I am not revealing who did it, and I'm not revealing the how of how it was done. I will be potentially talking about character details that could come into the resolution of the plot, and I will take the summary up through roundabouts where we find a body. So if you consider either of those things to be spoiler, consider yourself warned. I don't consider either of those things to be spoilers because I think character details really only become spoilery in retrospect. If you don't know what the resolution of the plot is, you don't necessarily really know what details are or are not important. So that's my disclaimer. So let's get into a synopsis before we start talking about the book itself. So this is an interesting book because it really is kind of a take on the previous book, Appointment with Death, in that there is a very unlikable kind of central patriarch in this case who has a number of heirs and ends up dead. But this time it's happening over Christmas, hence Hercule Poirot's Christmas. And that patriarch's name is Simeon Lee. He has 4 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter is dead, but she left behind a granddaughter who was raised only in Spain. Her father was Spanish, and her name is Pilar Estravados, I believe. And she is coming to Gorston Hall, which is where Simeon Lee lives, because he has invited her to come live with him, and she is coming at Christmas time. So the other children in this family, who are all, by the way, middle-aged at this point, the oldest is Alfred, and he lives at Gorston Hall with his wife Lydia. They live with Simeon. There is George, who is a very middling politician, pretty mediocre from what we can tell, and his very young wife, Magdalene, who is very frivolous and just spends a ton of money on clothes. There is David, who is very sensitive, and he became a painter. He is the only of the children who actively hates his father, essentially because his father was a constant philanderer on his wife, and in David's opinion, she died of a broken heart, so he resents his father. He's very sensitive, and his wife Hilda is like very understanding of that and sort of like helps him deal with things. And then the black sheep of the family, who no one has seen in a very long time, is Harry, and he has been living abroad and living just sort of scandalously. So Simeon has actually kind of tried to gather all of his children for Christmas for the first time. And everybody's a little suspicious as to why he's doing that. Basically, Simeon Lee is a piece of shit. He's like not nice. He essentially just really resents all of his offspring because he sees all of them as being very weak. And he gets all of them together for Christmas. There's a lot of other things happening. He gathers them all together and essentially proceeds to just kind of rip them each to shreds in front of each other, and then like dismisses them basically. And it's heavily implied at that point that he may be changing his will to favor Pilar because he actually really likes her. He likes her fiery Spanish nature, etc. So he does that, and then shortly thereafter, on Christmas Eve, he is found dead in his room in like a ton of blood, but the room is locked from the inside and all of the windows are locked, so it's very unclear as to how this murder was committed. Hercule Poirot comes into the picture because he's staying with Colonel Johnson, who is sort of like the chief police person for the area. He was the police inspector, the chief of police that we met in 3-Act Tragedy, so there are references to that book in this one. And Poirot happens to be staying with him when the kind of like news of this murder reaches him, so he is called in and he is working with the local police inspector, who I believe is called Mr. Sugden. And yeah, from there we figure out who done it. Other notable characters are that there is a very long-standing butler in this house. There's a very nosy kind of like male nurse who is taking care of Simeon Lee. And there's also Stephen Farr, who encounters Pilar on her way up to the train, and he is the son of one of Simeon Lee's old business partners, and he had been coming to essentially like check in on him. He is on the scene as well, so there's a few other kind of like tertiary characters, but mostly this is a study of these children and their spouses and who may have decided that they had it. They had had it officially with Simeon Lee's bullshit and killed him. So I don't know that this is a very successful mystery in the sense that the solution, while I guess technically you could have figured out, doesn't seem to be as kind of ingenious as some of Poirot's previous solutions. And to be fair, you probably could have said that also about Appointment with Death, which was the previous book. I, however, really enjoyed this book. It's the kind of Christie I like because it really is a character study. I say that over and over again, but it's really a character study. It's essentially kind of sussing out the psychology of each of the characters and figuring out who was disposed to do this. And for me, it really works as a book. But I concede that it may not be the best mystery. I think you can think of Appointment with Death as essentially Dumb Witness plus Death on the Nile. And I think you can think of this book, Hercule Poirot's Christmas, as Appointment with Death plus maybe The Mysterious Affair at Styles. It's definitely drawing on things that she's kind of done in the past, but sort of packaging it in a new way. And I think for me it's a successful book, but I understand from what I've read, I can tell that not everybody loves this one, and I can get that. I do think that the setting of Christmas adds some sort of like particular English charm to it, so in that respect I think it works very nicely as a holiday book. And in terms of just my overall impressions, I liked it. Now, in terms of our project, a couple of things I wanted to note. The fact that Pilar is basically like kind of a amalgamation of Spanish stereotypes is not great. It's clear that Agatha Christie didn't necessarily know a lot about Spanish people or had not encountered very many of them. She's, I think, kind of exoticized in a way that's a little not great. It is interesting because since she is in this book, we do get pretty like it is the Spanish Civil War essentially becomes a pretty big plot point in this book. If you don't know what that was essentially the Civil War that happened, I want to say between 30-ish, 31 and 38, 39, somewhere in there, basically the 30s. And it was the military and the like rich elite essentially overthrowing the newly formed republic that had just come into being. It's also kind of an example of like the appeasement tactics of the British, which also applied to Germany, because if they had helped some of the Republicans, they probably could have like held on to things. But when Hitler and Mussolini were supplying Franco's side, what you gonna do? So anyway, Franco eventually wins, and there's like a military dictatorship in Spain well into the 70s, I believe. So anyway, that's the context for where Pilar is fleeing from. She explicitly talks about seeing people dying and like cars being blown up and stuff. So that's sort of like an interesting historical note to be incorporating into this story. And I think I ultimately see why she chose to include that, but I think it is interesting that she did choose to include that. Just in terms of like plot mechanics and what she was trying to do with the Pilar character, I can see why she felt like that was a logical choice in terms of making those mechanics work well. It's interesting that she has it as such a strong kind of backstory flavor to this particular book. If I didn't say it before, this book is taking place roughly probably in 1937, so we are still in the grips of the Depression, but we have not yet entered World War II. When we do, that's going to definitely change the tone of some of her books. Probably not for the best overall, but it will be a significant change when that comes, so wait for that. That is coming shortly. But in terms of just like overall what my biggest takeaway from this book is, to me, this is really a predecessor book to what will be a much better version of this story told in a book that is not an Hercule Poirot novel, but one that we will talk about just because I think it's significant to kind of the story we're trying to tell in terms of the evolution of morality and popular notions of morality in the UK in this period, and that is Crooked House. This really is a test run for Crooked House, and Crooked House is one of my all-time favorite Agatha Christie books, so I probably have some fondness for it just because of that as well. But the big theme that this is introducing and sort of like coalescing, because we've seen this referenced a few times, I think for the first time in The Murder of Roger Ackroyd and then a few times since then, is this idea of blood and heredity, of not just physical traits and not just maybe personality traits, but potentially of goodness, badness, morality itself. Really the key, like kind of theme of this book is Does blood tell? How do people inherit different traits from different parents and different like parts of their families? Nature versus nurture. There's a lot of that happening, and what's interesting is essentially the solution of this murder is figuring out which of the children that he has most favors Simeon Lee. So I think this idea of genetics and sort of eugenics is really what the most interesting theme of this book is, at least for me. And I think that there's the most explicit discussion of that we have seen to date in her work. And that theme will continue. And I think really reach like the flowering of her exploration of it in Crooked House, which is a while away. So to me, that's the most interesting thing happening in this book. That was my primary interest in it. But other than that, I think that this is a pretty kind of like middle of the road Christie, a better middle of the road Christie. If you look, I think this ended up at like number 12-ish for me on my list of books I've read so far, which is interesting because I don't know that that's purely in terms of my enjoyment. I probably liked this better than a couple of books that are ranked higher, but in terms of just like, do I think this is a good book? No, it's probably not as good as some of the other ones that I maybe like better, but I still think this is a pretty good book. I think by the time things are said and done, this will end up being pretty much in the middle of the pack. Definitely way better than some of the ones that we have coming up in the spring, because yikes, things get bad. So that was my thoughts about Hercule Poirot's Christmas. I think you guys are seeing this, you guys should be seeing this the weekend before Christmas, so if you celebrate Christmas, happy Christmas to you. If you don't, happy holidays in general. This was a very Poirot Christmas episode, basically. And just so you know, as of today when I'm filming this, that book is on, Hercule Poirot's Christmas is on sale right now on Kindle for $2.99. I don't know how long they'll be holding that price or if that will still be valid by the time this goes up, but just so you know, that was the case at the time of filming. So if you're interested in reading this, you may want to jump on that. So I think that will do it. If you enjoyed this video, please do like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. All of that information is listed in the description box below. And I think that will do it. I hope you guys are having a wonderful week. I wish you a very Merry Christmas, and I will just talk to you later. Bye!